Hi, my name's Afeni and this is my YouTube channel. If you're new here, nice to meet you. If you're not, then welcome back. Yeah, I thought I'd sit down, film another video. It's February. I thought, let me try get at least one video out a month. I'm trying to be consistent, you know, like I've been trying to do that a lot in different areas of my life at the moment. You know, YouTube, just creating generally, journaling, going to the gym, and I'm happy that I've been consistent. It feels good when you get into a flow of things. On the theme of consistency, I wanted to bring back a series that I introduced but hadn't actually followed up. But I'm back again with another recent reads and recommendations video, which if you haven't watched my last one, go watch it, and two, it's basically where I just sit down and I waffle about books because I love books. And I haven't done one in a while and I've got a nice stack of books that I want to talk about. There's a couple here that I read a while ago, but I need to talk about them. I love my books and I love giving recommendations to people, and yeah, I want to talk about these. This is my stack of books that I'm going to be talking about. Got 5 books here. Some of them I read like genuinely ages ago, and some of them I've read recently. Some of them I'm reading now, so I thought I'd just sit down and talk about it. If you like my videos, then just subscribe because it's a wholesome vibe here. I love the vibes. Anyways, enough of my waffling. Yeah, I thought I'd bring this series back because I actually wanted to make it into like a series where every couple months I sit down and I talk about the books that I've read, so I'm gonna do that. I also have a bit of a time limit because I'm going to work shortly, so I'm gonna just try film this in like 20 minutes. So let's see if I can get this through. I also have my tea here in a mug that I painted. I've got a peppermint tea. This is my go-to when I read. If I read a book, I have to have like a peppermint tea or chamomile. I don't know, I feel like it just adds to the experience of reading a book. Just sat down, tea in hand, and a book. On the theme of books, I don't know if it's just me, but I can't do Kindles. Like, me and Kindle does not, I just don't get it. Like, I just don't get the idea of like reading it digitally. And I think it after my experience at uni, where constantly I was reading stuff digitally, like where they'd put your readings up on, you know, like on the system, and I'd have to read like pages and pages full, and I'd always end up printing them out because I just love the paper copy. I love like the feel of a book. I feel like it adds to my experience reading, and I just don't get that when I read digitally. I just don't get it. So I love my paper copy collection, and I also want to grow my collection so much. Like, I have this vision for when I'm older and I have my own house. I have this whole big wall that's a bookshelf and it has every single book I've ever read on it. So I'm in the process of collecting books. I've got a lot, and yeah, anyways, on to the books. I'm going to start off with a book that I read, I think it's definitely over a year ago. It's called Memoirs of a Geisha by Arthur Golden, and this book is incredible. I don't actually know where to start with this. I'll start with that there's a lot of controversy with this book. I would say controversy, but a lot of people aren't happy with the idea that it's like this white man writing this memoir of a geisha. And in the book, and I feel like if you read the foreword or the introduction, yeah, so if you actually like read, you know, the note of it, it explains why he's writing it, and it explains why the geisha wanted Arthur to write it, and it goes into that, and I think it's written in such a beautiful way. This is one of the books that like has changed my perspective on life. Like, I can't even explain it. Like, this is also my mum's copy of a book, so I just treasure it. And yeah, it's just amazing. Like, it goes through this story of this girl who, you know, ended up becoming a geisha in Japan, and it talks about the culture surrounding that, and, you know, the exploitation parts of it, and it just goes into her story, and it's crazy, like the stuff that she went through. And this, I think it was published post, how do you say the word, it was published after she died, I'm pretty sure. And I've I'm trying to like recollect my thoughts on this book because it's been that long since I've read it. And I read it over the summer and it was just a really nice experience reading it. Like, it was one of those books where I got so immersed in it. Like, I could not put it down. Like, it was just like, I need to know what happens next. And because it's like, it's not like a story. It's like, this is what happened. You know, you really get hooked on it. And I would recommend this to anyone. Then that goes with all the books I'm going to talk about. But this book, like, it's really emotional as well. You know, it just talks about her family and how she got to where she was, and it is sad. It's so sad. And I never really knew much about geisha culture in Japan, and reading this book like definitely opened my eyes to it more because I just didn't know like much about it. Like, the writing style of the book, like you feel like you're experiencing it as well. Like, it's so immersive and it's so in depth. Like, the character descriptions, I don't want to say full circle moments, but it just shows life in such a beautiful way, and it shows the hardships of it. It shows like how tough it is. And you know, I actually have a little quote that I have. This is like the one quote that stood out to me for the whole book, which I literally had to get like a little post-it note just to mark it. I'm going to read that little section of the book. One cold evening after winter had come, I sat a long while in the maid's room watching snow falling silently on the Okia's little courtyard. I imagined my father coughing at the lonely table in his lonely house, and my mother so frail upon her futon that her body scarcely sank into the bedding. I stumbled out into the courtyard to try to flee the misery, but of course we can never flee the misery that is within us. On to the next book. So I'm actually reading this book currently, and I thought I'd just include it because I'm like a third of the way in. This book is so interesting. Like, this has been my go-to before bed, or just, you know, first thing when I wake up, because it's just factual and it just kind of like gets me in like a good like reading flow. And I found that reading non-fiction before reading any fiction book like just helps me like process the words better, because sometimes I've tried to read like I went through a phase where I would constantly read classics, and I just kept me into a phase where like I'd get stuck because I try to read all these like, you know, old classics, and it was so not hard to understand, but like the way some classics are written are so in depth and they just are so descriptive that it can be so hard to keep consistent with reading classics. So I took a break and I was like, I need to start reading some non-fiction. So I thought I'd start reading this just to break up my fiction novel reading. And this book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, is one of those books that like you need to read. Like, it's so informative, it has so much interesting information, and especially I think this was written in 2018, or he started writing it in 2018. So reading about, you know, topics on AI or technology and communication in 2025 now is so interesting, because he really does predict a lot of the stuff, and he talks about like data and who owns it, and he goes into like bigger picture, you know, problems of technology and the media, but it goes into bigger pictures of nationalism, like how that means we can communicate with each other, you know, and ownership of the digital world, which is such a recent invention when you think about it. So the implications of it in future are like, we just don't, well, we can predict, but we don't know how far it's gonna go. And one bit that I've read so far that really pointed out to me like how important this is he compares George Orwell's 1984 to the present day, and talking about how, you know, in that book 1984 the screens are watching everyone and they're like picking up on how, you know, what people enjoy doing or what they're thinking. And he literally goes into how that is literally where technology is heading, and it is heading. You know, your phone picks up on what sort of media you consume, and it creates, you know, your For You page or Explore page. And it's so interesting, like, because 1984 is one of my favorite books. Did you see that comparison? It's so interesting, and it makes you think like George Orwell was so ahead of his time. Like, he knew what was up, and I could make a whole video about 1984, because that book just like I've read it like 3 times. But yeah, this book is amazing. I do also want to read Sapiens, which I have here actually. I'm gonna get it out. but I need to be careful because my camera is like propped up. My camera is literally propped up on like a stack of books, and Sapiens is next to that stack of books, but this is another book by the same author, and I need to get on to reading that because I've had that on my shelf for years. Like, I read like the first chapter years ago, but it was when I was in like college, and I just didn't really like want to be reading like really factual informative books back then. You know, I went through a phase where all I wanted to read was just like, I don't know, classics and like dystopian novels, and I still do that, but I'm just trying to read more informative books because I feel like you just learn so much, and it talks about stuff that I guess you see day to day, but you don't actually go in depth of. But yeah, go and pick this up. It's the 21st century, so it's very relevant. I'm yet to finish it, so I don't want to say too much because I haven't actually finished it, but I really like it. And I also like how he's very like forward with it. He doesn't hold back in, and I don't want to say opinions, but he doesn't like censor anything. He doesn't hold back his thoughts on certain situations. He's very forward in, I'm going to address these topics as they are. I'm not going to like try sugarcoat it or defend anyone. It's just how it is, and which I feel like a lot of information nowadays are a bit censored because we don't want certain people getting implications for things, and it's like, no, like, things are happening in the world, you know, you need to be aware of it. But yeah, that was my next book. Going on to my next book is a book that I picked up when I was in college, when I was writing my personal statement, and I never read it, and I never thought to read it until now, because I picked it up, I was like, yeah, I'm going to use it for my personal statement, along with like 10 other books that I also picked up to write my personal statement with. And I thought, I never read this. It was sitting on my shelf, and I thought, what? Like, this book looks really interesting, why did I not read it? And it is 5 Ideas to Fight For, and it's by Anthony Lester, and he was a human rights lawyer. He worked in litigation for years, and I believe he passed away a couple of years ago, and I think this might have been his last book that he published. And it talks about stuff, you know, cases he's worked on in the UK, and not just the UK, but just like in America and in Europe, and talks about different areas of law and just life and rights and freedom. I mean, you know, the 5 ideas he believes we should fight for, which are human rights, equality, free speech, privacy, and the rule of law. And he's someone who's worked in that, he's seen it, like the amount of like bills that he's helped pass. So he was involved in the Race Discrimination Act being passed, and it's so interesting because I actually read a lot about that act for my dissertation, and I wrote my dissertation about, this is such a long-winded topic, but for my dissertation I looked into how Caribbean migration has contributed to the British economy, values, society, and I basically evaluated that and contrasted, you know, how Caribbean migrants are treated in the UK and whether that's fair, and I looked at how terminology has been created around that to kind of like group people together, and it was really interesting. I loved writing my dissertation, and I actually am working on expanding it, which is a whole thing in itself, which I don't actually have time to get into. But this book was like a behind the scenes on stuff that I'd researched for that, and it was so interesting to read about it because there's so much work that goes into it, and it's these people behind the scenes who make our lives like easier. Yeah, so this book talks about how freedom is under threat, and it talks about governmental issues surrounding that and ways that we can respond to it. You know, we are contributing members of society. You know, one way is just reading things like this, you know, reading up about our freedom and our rights, because it made me realise as well, and also when I was doing my dissertation, is people aren't always aware of the rights that they have, so they end up getting exploited in government. And this isn't just in the UK, but in many countries where people don't actually know like what rights they have and how they are free to do certain stuff. Currently on equality, so I'm on the 2nd chapter of this, and I'm in a phase right now where I'm just kind of hopping between books. So this is, yeah, one of the books I'm currently reading. I'm just trying to do a chapter every week because it's kind of split nicely into 5 sections, so I'm just kind of doing like a chapter every now and then. And I've taken a much more relaxed approach to reading recently. I used to get into a habit of being like, right, I'm reading one book, I have to read that book and finish it before I go on to the next one. But I realised I can read multiple books. Like, I don't have to just read one book. But yeah, that's the second book that I would recommend. Okay, so the next book is Into Thin Air by John Cracker. I don't actually know if I'm saying that correctly. John Cracker. It's like spelled like that. Into Thin Air is a kind of autobiographical. It's a book that talks about his experience on Everest, and he was a journalist who had actually been commissioned to go up to base camp to report on like a trip that was going up to Everest. And I'm gonna take a sip of my tea. So yeah, he was commissioned to go up and basically write about it, and it ended up being like a massive disaster, and I believe 12 people lost their lives. And he was writing for a magazine, but it ended up reporting on what had happened. And this book like was so emotional but also so informative at the same time, because it tells the story of what happened, and it also goes into his own experience of, he feels like he had some sort of blame into it. And without going too much into it, because you just need to read the book, but it goes into like the part he played and how when you're in those situations, it really is life or death. And he talks about how he felt like he could have done more to save some people's lives, but in the time he was like, I need to get out, I need to like save myself. And when you're in that sort of environment and those conditions, you don't have the energy. You just like are at such a low altitude, you're at such a high altitude where your brain is not functioning correctly. This book goes into the cultural like symbolism of Everest as well, which was so interesting to me, and how, you know, a lot of these Sherpas at the time thought that the disaster was caused by like a disrespect. I loved as well how this book, each chapter started with a quote, and not all of them were directly related to mountain climbing, but some of them were. And it was just a really nice way to introduce each chapter, because it went through like different stages of the climb, and it would go into, okay, right, this feet high, this day, summit or base camp, and it would give a quote, and then it would go into it, and it would just be an account of what happened, and it linked it from when it happened to kind of him writing it and how he feels in that present time. It's so amazing how people are, you know, it goes into the history of the first person to climb Everest and how that was such an achievement, and creates this whole culture of like risk seeking and people like, you know, getting their lives like putting their lives at risk. Okay, I've been recording for so long and I actually need to get ready for work, but quickly, the last book that I'd recommend is The Kite Runner, and this is by Khaled Hosseini, and this book has been battered. I don't know what happened to it. This book I read a couple months ago, and this book was so emotional. Like this book, like I was actually sat in a salon getting my hair done, and I was like, oh my god, like the last like page of it, like, oh my god. This book is about a story of a boy, and he grew up in Afghanistan. It talks about the war and his migration to America and how culturally he's experienced different sides of the world, and it just talks about his experience, and he faces these feelings of guilt, and it goes into this personal story that he had with his best friend and his dad. And this book, when it goes into detail of redemption, forgiveness and making amends, is such like an interesting theme, because it put those concepts in a way that I'd never thought about it before, because it goes on a story about his life and how he deals with those emotions, and it all links back at some point. And I've never seen it like that, you know. I feel like I've always read about things like forgiveness and redemption in such like a straightforward way, but this book shows that in parallel to someone's lives, and how it can take, you know, 20 years for it to come back. And it's a nice parallel from the start to the end of, you know, he moves out of America, he moves to America, and he has to go back on himself, back for a journey, and it's like going to this foreign place, but to him it's where he's from, but he puts it so far behind him that he doesn't recognize it anymore. and it was just a really beautiful story. Like I actually got emotional reading it. And yeah, I need to I need to rewatch the film because the film is also incredible. And yeah, I really want to read more of his work because the way he writes is so descriptive and so in-depth. I'm just gonna end the video here because I need to get ready. I have to go to work, but I hope you enjoyed listening to my recent reads and recommendations, which some of them are from a while ago, so I kind of need to keep reading so I can do another one of these. But yeah, if you've read any of these books or if you have any thoughts on them, I would love to hear about it. Yeah, it's been quite a factual book, you know, my last factual book. It's been quite a factual head-on topic here. Like my last one was very much classics and novels and, you know, beautiful kind of stories, and I've kind of switched up and I've, you know, started reading different types of books, which I really enjoy. I'm trying to read a bigger variety of books this year, and I'm trying to hit a goal of at least 25 books for 2025. I did the same last year and I wanted to do 24 books for 2024, but I don't think I hit that. I think I did about 12, and that's not including like uni reading. I mean, I've graduated now, so I'm not reading as much as I was, but yeah, I'm gonna end the video here, but I will see you in my next video. Yeah, if you like this, give it a like. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed me chat about books, then I'll see you in my next video. These are books I'm currently reading, so stay tuned for the next one where I talk about me finishing these books. Actually, I'm gonna give a little summary of what I thought about them and start talking about the books I'm going to be reading. Yeah, if you have any book recommendations as well, please let me know. Yeah, I'll see you soon.